Tell us about this book. One of the lucky ones describes your own life struggles. Please share with the audience a little bit about the story that you tell in this important book.
Yeah, one of the lucky ones is my memoir, and it's about my escape from a domestic violence situation and the aftermath. And it was really therapeutic. That's why I started writing. I never intended to do anything with it. It was one of the many things that was suggested to me after I got out of a domestic violence marriage. And once I escaped and my focus was my children, and I put all of my eggs in that basket. I made sure that they had the therapy. I did everything. And I finally realized I needed to focus on myself. One of the things that someone suggested was, oh, why don't you write? And I have never been a writer. I love those pretty journals that you find in Barnes and Noble. And I would pick them up. I'm like, oh, these are pretty. And then they would just like sit in the corner. And one night I just started thinking about like, well, I guess I could start talking about this. And oh, maybe this chapter would be called this. And it just kind of was like word vomit. It just poured out of me. And I wrote it and I just put it aside. I was like, maybe I'll show my kids someday so they can truly understand, because they were really little when it happened. And then I showed it to one of my girlfriends and she's like, you need to publish this. Even if this helps just one other person hearing your story, you need to publish this. And I sat on it for a little bit longer and I was like, you know what? She's right. If I just help one other person who my story resonates with and helps them to, wake up. That's what I call it. You kind of wake up. You're in a trance a little bit when you're in a domestic violence situation. And then you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what is happening to me? Then it's worth it. So it's my memoir about how I met my ex-husband and our marriage and why I stayed, and then the after part of it, which no one really talks about, that the scariest and most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is the aftermath, when you finally decide to leave and leave.
And why is that?
It's because the abuser has lost control.
Mhm.
They have no control over you anymore. You've left the situation. So then they resort to other things. For mine, I was stalked, I was harassed, and I felt very little support with the criminal justice system. And please don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for police officers, for any type of law enforcement, for anyone in the court system. But because I had never called before, there was very little done to my ex-husband. He was basically just given a slap on the wrist. And a lot of the things he was doing, stalking, he convinced one of our neighbors at one point to gain access to their camera so he could watch me coming and going. Even that, it was considered hearsay. There wasn't enough evidence to protect me.
And which jurisdiction were you in at that time?
Fairfax County, Virginia.
Okay, okay, because I know you've been in Pennsylvania and other locations. And when did what level did you reach? I mean, did you ever have him arrested?
He was arrested. There was a domestic violence kind of implosion on August 3rd, 2019 at 8:59 p.m. It will forever be ingrained in my mind. And it started out as a fight. He ended up throwing water on me, and then he threatened to burn the house down with myself and the children in it. And I grabbed my babies and we ran to my neighbor's house, who was a police officer at the time, and I called 911, and they ended up picking him up and he was arrested. And that kind of started that was, while traumatic for myself and my children, that was my open door. That was my way out. And I was able to get out, and I got a protective order, and I was somewhat protected from him. But it took a while.
It doesn't sound like the protective order protected you from stalking because that happened after you got separated, right?
It did. And at that point I had a permanent protective order, which is
Mhm.
really, it's not permanent. It's only 2 years. I don't know why they call it permanent.
Mhm.
Um, and with the protective order, I mean, by the time we renewed it, when the 2 years were up, we renewed it for another year. The protective order was like 10 pages long because I kept adding things to it. Like, he can't surveil me. Well, it's in the protective order, but there wasn't concrete evidence that he um, was using our neighbor's camera to watch me, even though he had submitted the neighbor's camera video footage in our divorce proceedings. The police told me that wasn't enough to consider stalking.
That's it's so troubling, and as you know, I'm very hardcore law and order, and it seems that sometimes our legal system lets down the most needy.